Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm joined by my phenomenal cousin and co-host, Attorney Sonia Madison. How you doing?
Well, I mean, even though the weather has been nice, the shutdown is it's hard to be too excited about a government shutdown. Even though
Right
you knew
in.
it was
Just get
coming.
right on in there, huh?
You knew it was coming. But it's hard. But I will say on some good news, I mean, Tennessee won last Saturday, so that always helps starts the week off right. But yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. What about you? Because you're
Uh,
still working.
I'm still working. Life is always peachy for me. Peachy
Oh, look
is
at
what
you. Life is always peachy. Okay.
always peachy. It's always peachy. So when life deals you lemons, you just make lemonade, and that's what I choose to do. But I don't know. Life is, it's bad when you look at what's going on around you, but I try to encourage myself that there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it all. And
You just
and
enjoy the journey, and then we'll see what happens once you get to your destination.
yeah,
Yeah.
it could always be worse. And in fact, it probably will get worse. So, enjoy the moments while they last.
Well, since we're going to jump right on in, and I feel like it's more of a healthcare issue, but why do you believe that this shutdown is continuing to happen? Because we hear Republicans say, "Oh, it's because the Democrats want to give money or allow immigrants who are here, I guess, unlawfully to have health care." And then you hear Democrats say, "No, we're trying to make sure you do not continue to decrease or mess with the Medicaid or Medicare budget." And they're arguing that immigrants who are not here lawfully do not get any benefits, including healthcare. So again, I feel like it's a lot of healthcare arguments, but from your perspective in that industry, what is this fight about?
Well, this fight has nothing to do with the healthcare industry, at least not for Republicans. This fight has everything to do with Project 2025, and it's been a ploy and a tactic of the Republican Party to gut government for decades. For decades, they've been wanting to gut it, and when they started gutting it with the Doge and Elon Musk, they got all the blame for it. It's all fell on them. But now they have an opportunity to share some of that blame with Democrats in shutting down the government. And so it's just a whole other tool that, Donald Trump is masterful in terms of knowing how to manipulate people with money and know how to manipulate behavior with money. And as a result, what he's doing now, he said, okay, we're going to shut down the government. We're going to target all your cities, all your blue cities and states that get federal government money funding. This is how we'll cut those things first, and so that your people will feel it more than the Republicans. I'm going to take care of my people and just utterly annihilate your people and make you a villain among them as well. So it's an interesting strategy. It's a very good, I think, strategy from a diabolical standpoint. It's a very good strategy to say, hey, listen, if you don't have a conscience and you don't care about people saying, hey, this is um, frankly partisan, and you're hurting people that don't support you because they don't support you, if you're okay with that, then go right on ahead and make it work to your advantage. And basically, what you're doing is you're just exciting your base even more because that's all they really want to do is stick it to the libs. And so, but from a
It's,
healthcare,
oh,
huh?
sorry, go ahead. I didn't know if you were passing the baton, but go ahead.
You're welcome to do that. I'm happy to talk about the healthcare issue later on
No, no,
about.
no. From a healthcare perspective, go ahead.
So the argument is that Democrats want to provide health care for, free health care for illegal immigrants. And what the Democrats, the way that things are set up right now, illegal immigrants are not eligible to receive any federal funding and health insurance. They can't get Medicaid. They can't get any of those Medicare or any other federally funded health coverage. So in that regard, the Democrats are telling the truth. They really just not. You're not going to be able to come in here and sign up for it. Now the flip side to that is that certain states did allow certain coverage, certain immigrants to still get coverage and to also get benefits. So if you're here illegally and your children need to go to school, your children get to go to school. If you're here illegally and you have an emergency, you go to the emergency department, you're going to get the care, and then they'll provide that type of care. And basically, what happens is the state funded dollars are was used to pay for some of these things. And you could say, well, it comes from a different bucket. Well, yeah, but if we weren't feeding that bucket with federal dollars, which is the Republicans' argument, if we weren't feeding that state bucket with federal dollars, then you'd have less state buckets to allocate toward that. And would you really then allocate your state dollars that way? And maybe the answer is yes. And if it meant that we wound up having to take up state taxes or anything like that, then maybe they would continue to do it. But it is a little inhumane to say that, hey, I don't know what the Republicans' answer to this is if someone presents to the emergency department and with a stroke and a heart attack, and then they say, "Show me your immigration papers," and you don't have those immigration. What are you going to do? You're going to let them die? And for a lot of them, the answer is yeah. Well, they could have died in their own country at that point, and which to me is a little disheartening for people who claim to be the ambassadors of God and earth. So,
Well, what I was listening to Senator Warren talk on CBS, and it's probably saying the same thing you said, but she, I guess, worded it in a different way. But what she said is, first of all, again, if you're here unlawfully, you're not getting benefits. But what happens is the hospitals and the clinics are still needing funding because they are obligated by, the oath and all this kind of stuff to still treat anyone that comes in. And so if they are
and by law,
continuously, yeah, if they are still obligated to do it, whether you are here lawfully or not, or whether you have insurance or here regardless, they're still having to treat you. And so if you reduce that money, that also doesn't just affect people who are here unlawfully, but it will affect people who don't have insurance at all. Because again, they are obligated to treat them. And so the federal government and so like you said, the state subsidize some of that expense in treating people that either don't have insurance or are not here lawfully. And so it's not as much as a matter of, oh, this is enabling people who are here unlawfully to have insurance as it is, hey, we got to make sure these clinics, these hospitals that are predominantly possibly in these poor urban areas continue to have funding, continue to stay open. Otherwise, again, if this doesn't affect the immigrants, it also affects people, American citizens who can't afford insurance.
yeah,
Um,
this is not just federal dollars going to help. So some of the federal dollars are going to help those clinics and hospitals that are serve rural areas and underprivileged areas that heavily depend on federal funding in order to do that. Many of those hospitals have already closed down after they passed the big beautiful bill, as they so called it. And so that's where the issue about the cuts come from because the bill has already been passed and the funding has already been cut. Even those funds that had been allocated to those services are now being redirected, which is the biggest problem with that the Democrats have is that they have to imminently do something, and the only tool that they have at their disposal right now is to say, "We're not going to sign this continual resolution as long as you continue to enact this bill and enforce this bill in a way that's harmful to the American people." And I know even when I said that, that sounded like it was a little biased, like I was supporting the Democrat side. And I want to say that a little bit more objectively. But the reality is that clinics and hospitals are shutting down, and people are not going to have access to that type of health care. Not only that, the big beautiful bill repealed some of the Obamacare tax credits that they had initially put out there. So people who were getting tax credits for health insurance will start seeing their health insurance premium double, triple at some point. And so that's in the face of rising inflation or in the face of, or predicted rising inflation. It's just, they say it's going to hurt the American family, at least probably about $2,000 per year, a minimum for for many families who have to purchase insurance. And it's listen, your vote matters. And when you guys get when you get out there and you say, well, you're not doing what has the Democrats been doing for me? Well, Donald Trump asked the question before, what do you have to lose? We're starting to find out.
And
You
it's
have
not
to
just your vote on the federal level. Your local elections are, to me, way more important because what's happened, at least what's happening here in Georgia, is that if there is a state pretty much similar plan like the Affordable Care Act, then that is what you have to use. So for me, like used to be on the Affordable Care Act. Once Georgia enacted their thing, they removed me from that. And then I had to use the state. And I will say, yes, those premiums shot up. And I had to start hustling a little bit more. And so again, those local elections, because one, if your local government isn't going to do it at all, and we see what the federal government is doing with the Affordable Care Act, then you're going to, again, a lot of people in your state will be without insurance, if the state doesn't do it. But now if the state does it, again, it's going to go up if we continue to have federal funding not be able to subsidize some of that cost. And so, yes, please, people.
literally for 3 years. For 3 years, I went without insurance. Yes, the medical doctor went without insurance. 3 years, me or my family. And the reason why we did, we had to pay. I think our premium was maybe $1,500 a month. Um, with a $7,500 deductible. People who don't realize understand. A lot of times, people don't understand what insurance is. So a deductible is that amount that you have to pay out of pocket before the insurance provides anything. So I'm paying $1,500 a month, so $18,000 a year for premiums, plus $7,500 for a deductible. That's $25,500 before the insurance company pays a dime. And then once they did kick in their responsibility, they were going to pay only 50%. So I had to pay $25,000 before the insurance company would pay 50% of my medical expenses. The reality is that we didn't have $25,000 of expenses in a year. And unfortunately, you can't predict the future. And if something catastrophic was to happen during that period of time, your bills could easily exceed $25,000. And so that's the predicament that people find themselves in, even those who are quote unquote in some of the higher earning classes and other higher earning professions. This is an issue, which is one of the reasons why people go find jobs in the private sector. I did it. You know,
Yeah, me too, right?
did it, you did it. and so that's, I think, the overall goal of this Republican administration is to drive people to dependence on the corporate sector. And if you want to look, that's the bigger goal, or at least that's Donald Trump's bigger goal. Now he has some people who have allied themselves with him, who have a different kind of goal. They want to establish their Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism, and then
Thanks
other
for that
people.
specificity.
Yeah, exactly. And so those are two particular superseding goals. But the way that you get people dependent on corporations, you fire everybody who was working in the government and make them scramble to find lower paying jobs. And that's what's going to happen. We're going to wind up you're going to have jobs available to you, but the corporate sector is going to say, hey, no, we've got an abundance of workers now, because we've already laid off 300,000 Black women, and we've laid off other millions of other federal workers. And now with the government shutdown, we're going to lay off hundreds of thousands of more people. We're going to just completely gut certain departments that were there before, that they're never coming back. And if they do come back, it's going to be a little bit difficult to restaff those people, because they will have, out of desperation, have gone to the private sector. And then you say, well, once you open those other jobs, then they can always come back to the federal government. But who's going to want to come back to the federal government when you realize that possibility is that 4 years later, or maybe even 2 years later, depending on how the Congress goes, your job could be at risk. And nobody's going to want to trust the government at that point. So sometimes they'll just settle for the lower paying corporate jobs, plus they need insurance. And so those persons who not only need to pay their mortgage, who also need to pay for insurance, are going to find themselves seeking these corporate jobs, and the corporate fat cats get fatter.
Which is interesting, where Donald Trump is over here saying, "Okay, Democrats, I'm just gonna lay off." To me, I'm like, you threatening to do worse is your bargaining chip. I mean, automatically, he doesn't care about his constituents. He doesn't care about the American people. If you're going to threaten to even do even more harm to the
Oh, he
people,
said the quiet part out loud. He
he
actually said,
did.
"Oh, you
He
gave me a
did.
great opportunity here."
I was gonna lay
Because the
off.
government,
He
yeah,
did.
this is what I've been looking for. You handed me a win, and basically that's what it is. In Project 2025, who's the director of OMB was one of the authors of Project 2025, and everybody said, I hate to say that the prophet Kamala called all of this stuff, but she's right. She said he's going to. This is what's going to happen, and now he says she's going to send military out into your streets, and we see that happening as well. And
As well as make fun of our leaders and say, "Oh, it was a joke." Really, you putting a thumbnail on Hakeem Jeffries was supposed to be haha funny?
well, they came back and they put one on him too, and so or had him playing the
Right.
guitar or
And it
whatever in the
is still
background.
not
So,
funny. I mean, imagine as, someone who is from Mexico, I mean, because it's supposed to be degrading. And so you
hmm
doing it to yourself, it doesn't change with the message you're sending.
right.
And that really kind of goes a little bit into our topic on cultural war versus spiritual war. But I wanted to give a couple of legal updates, or I should say, court rulings. So we've got Supreme Court telling Donald Trump, which is a shock, that Lisa Cook can stay in the Federal Reserve while they continue to battle that out in the courts. And we'll see how long that happens, considering that we're on a shutdown. But that was a win for Lisa Cook, who, is the only Black female on the Federal Reserve, and that on it, therefore, is being a target by Donald Trump. Also, Diddy was sentenced to over a little over 4 years, I think it's 50 months in prison. Apparently, the judge said she was not convinced that he would not do it again, and said that a substantial sentence was needed to send a message to abusers and victims that exploitation and violence against women is met with accountability.
What do you think about that ruling there? Because my understanding was that she referenced some things in her brief or whatever as she was handing down the sentence that he was not necessarily convicted of, and I can't remember what it was. It was coercion. Coercion, that was not part of his conviction, but yet she mentioned that, and it appears that that might have influenced the length of his sentence.
I think there were a lot of factors that influence. Just for everyone, I think he was convicted of prostitution, and you can decide whether coercion is in there or not. But he was convicted of that, particularly across state lines. That's why it's a federal crime here. But also, I think one of the prosecutors said he'd already started booking speaking engagements, as if to, again, to show that he's not remorseful and he doesn't see any wrong in what he's done. To me, if I was on the defense side, I would disagree just with the prejudicial factor, because I'd imagine a lot of people that are convicted of this crime probably gets less than a year, if that. I know that the prosecution wanted 11 years, and I think the defense was arguing for 14 months, which would have really just been time served, because I think that's how long he's been there now. So, I mean, honestly, he'll probably just serve 36 months, if that, and he may even serve a lesser time than the 50 that he's charged. But as a woman, as a human being, I didn't have an issue with the sentence. And again, I do think that it's unfortunate sometimes that celebrities have to essentially be well, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. I mean, sometimes celebrities can get off and sometimes they are going to be the example. But I do think in this situation, considering not only the heinousness of everything that went on during this for a period of so many years,
Well, you're talking about the heinousness. Let's talk about just the
you,
crime that he
you can
got
call it the
convicted of.
prosecution, the
Yeah,
heinousness of prostitution for several years. If you want to just stick with what he was convicted of, going across state lines. Now, again, she did reference abuse of victims and exploitation and violence against women. So he wasn't necessarily convicted of domestic violence, but he also conceded that he did commit domestic violence. And so you can kind of take that however you want to take it. So again, that's why I say from a legal standpoint, yeah, I can understand this isn't necessarily fair because this isn't typically the sentence that I believe a lot of people get. But from a moral humanity female standpoint, I'm okay with it.
What about from a racial standpoint? Because do you know how many people Hugh Hefner flew in to have sex with across state lines? I mean,
But I
how
also
is that
know that your
how
boy,
is that different?
I know your boy Harvey Weinstein is still doing life behind bars.
Well,
So
his was a little bit different. His was a little bit different though, but the issue, I guess, at this if you're convicted of prostitution across state lines, yeah, there have been plenty of rich men who have done it. It's, frankly, think about this: if you fly somebody in, if you just happen to, you don't even have to be a rich person or something like that. You fly somebody in, you know, you wanted to have an affair here or there, and you out of town, and you fly somebody over there with you, and you meet up in this place. Is that now a crime or something? Because you're like, okay, is that a person a paid prostitute? Then or what? What happens? And so I think this sentencing and this conviction then grazed the line about a lot of things that will cause, I think, a lot of affluent men who do these types of things to think twice about.
oh, then we have a win, right? If they think twice, isn't that a win? Because I think
Well,
you also have to look at it from a
I don't
standpoint.
think you I don't think you win moral you I don't think you win moral battles with legal victories. I
Well, I
don't
mean,
like
to
that.
some degree, justice is kind of a moral concept, to be honest.
It's a
But to
cultural
me,
concept, not a spiritual.
right, right, there we go on that because it's just his mindset, the Lord, right? But to me, there's one thing to say, oh, what about him as a black man? But there's others to say, well, what about the black female victims? I mean, because oftentimes we feel like black female victims do not get nearly as much exposure as well as much justice than their white counterparts.
So is it justified for the black woman to get justice by having a disproportionate punishment against a black man?
Again, dependent on your standpoint, because again, what the judge said was this is about exploitation and violence against women. So to your argument, she's not really focused on the prostitution, and she's focused on the domestic violence and again, I mean the exploitation. And so if those are the metrics, again, that's why I don't have a problem with it. But I hear your argument was, well, the jury didn't convict him of that, some of the other stuff, but he also didn't deny it either.
Yeah.
Um,
So this is one of the ways that the system turns us against each other. And I think that's a problem ongoing if we can justify an injustice because it makes us feel better and because we've suffered so many other injustices so long, it feels like a victory to us.
You keep
And
calling it injustice. He could have got up to 11 years. So, I mean,
he
he
could
was
have he
still
could have got
singing
up to
within the
11 years,
confines of the law.
but
So,
the injustice is that there are others who do the same thing and won't even be prosecuted for it. And there are others who do the same thing. And if they were convicted, they probably would have gotten a much lighter sentence for it. And so the question is why does this one particular one get it? If it's because of every other factor but his race, then okay, that's one thing. But you and I both know that his race played a factor in it to some degree.
but I would argue that his celebrity status played a bigger factor than his race.
Yeah,
But, you can make the argument that, well, I mean,
yeah.
if he wasn't also a black celebrity, he might not have put a
His
target on his
celebrity
back.
just made it even
But
worse.
but I mean, we've talked about this, almost repeatedly. We know that as minorities, we have to fight against stereotypes on top of fighting against, competing and being in a capitalist society. So, I mean, we can debate that all day long, but that's just life. We got to accept that that's what it is.
Yeah, I think we got to stop. And I'm not saying that we have to be monolithic in our thinking by any means, but I think we really have to stop celebrating. We have to stop identifying each other as enemy, and then celebrating victory, even when it's an ill-gotten victory, or not
I was
saying that
gonna
his
say, I'm not
sentence was
gonna say that it
ill-gotten.
was an ill-gotten victory.
I'm not saying that in regard to this. I'm saying, for example, uh, let's say, for example, you win the Republican Party, and I guess I'm thinking about how Republicans do it. And I'm thinking also from the standpoint of Christianity. There are people who are saying, okay, well, let's look at the invasion with the sending the military, sending the National Guard into these cities. Some people are very satisfied on the Republican side. They're like, oh yes, we finally are getting control of these cities. Now, the reality is they know that they're not going to have any type of control of the city unless you have a military occupation, constant military presence there. In fact, the presence of the National Guard being at some of these in these areas is not really occupying the entire city. It's in a particular block, but the message and the narrative that's out there is saying militarize our cities, um, do whatever we have to do to stick it to the libs and all these wild people who are getting out and doing all kinds of riotous protests. Um, but if it's ill gotten, if you didn't get the military into the city by appropriate means, why would you celebrate that? Why you celebrate violation of the law because the outcome is one that favors you. And I don't think that we should ever get to that point just because it favors me. I can excuse the method by which it was gotten. That's the slippery slope for me because then you say by any means necessary. And I don't think that's true. I don't think the ends justify the means. I think the means justify the end. As Christians, that's what we should be saying. Okay, yeah, if we still hold up our integrity, level of integrity, and it seems that we lose, we still won. And that whole concept is gone. It's lost on too many people in our society. And sadly, it's also lost on those who consider themselves followers of Christ.
It's interesting that you brought that up because that's one is going to seemingly transition into our topic, but I'm curious to know then your thoughts on, I don't know if you've heard about the Iowa superintendent who was arrested and detained. And as it turns out, he's a black man. As it turns out, when they start doing a history that he actually wasn't here lawfully, he said that he had I think a degree from, I want to say it was Morgan State, but some college, and it turns out that they don't have any record of him graduating. But again, it was an ill-gotten raid. I mean, we know that they're targeting people based on skin color, and based on what they may perceive to be someone who is an American citizen or not, based on what they physically look like. And again, he's been detained. He's in ICE now. He probably did. He should have his day in court to be able to show whether or not he did go through the proper channels or not. But if it turns out he didn't, are you okay with the fact that they detained him even though it was through means that are not typically appropriate?
You tell me there's a legal standard called the poisonous fruit or something like that, though, right?
They're dependent on the evidence, yeah. So I mean, because
Right.
the state can argue, oh no, we got this evidence from someone else. And so, I don't know if they knew it beforehand or if they again racially profile or if they could have just started looking up people and then found it just by virtue of, hey, I don't want this person in that position. Let's see if we can find something like they did with Lisa Cook. I don't want her in the
Mm.
Federal Reserve, so let's see if we can find some kind of mortgage issue to kick her out. And so, that's what I'm saying. It even if it doesn't come from lawful or arresting him first, say they just targeted him, found something, and then use that as an arrest. I mean, are you okay even in that situation? Because
You
we're
know,
going to be targets.
it's okay. So then let's expound it one further. If somebody gets arrested for drunken driving and you fingerprint them or whatever else, or get arrested for some lesser crime, and then you find out that their DNA matches that of a serial killer, later on, is that okay? I don't know how that's different. Um, and so I think we're in a situation where it's hard for us to really rationalize what our true morals are in some of these situations because our morals are influenced by circumstances that influence us either positively or negatively. And so we compromise our morals at that point. And I think right just has to be right one way or another. And regardless of
Even
what
though
the
you're not sure how to
consequences of
define it.
it
Because
are.
I will say a difference between a lawful arrest, because again, if you're drunk driving, that is a lawful arrest, versus
Yeah.
you are just targeted by virtue of your skin color, and then they find something that then enables them to have a lawful arrest. I think that's
I
a
would
little.
think that that's poisonous fruit. I would, in my mind, that would be poison fruit. But the sad part about it is that we're not dealing only with a judicial war in that situation. We're dealing with a culture war because the
Exactly.
culture will say, "Hey, I don't. Any way you find them, I'm okay with that. If it means that you stop and frisk, and then you get a whole bunch of other criminals in the process, you violate somebody's rights in order to get the end that you desire, then it's acceptable." And I'm concerned about that because we're supposed to live in the land of the free, and we no longer become the free. I think it was Ben Franklin said something to the effect that those who would compromise their liberty for safety deserve neither. And we're in that situation right now where people are saying, "Hey, I don't care. You can violate somebody else's liberty as long as it accomplishes my safety." And uh, that's not America. That's not America. And so it's Trump's America, and that's why his name will be on the Trump coin and his face on the Trump coin. So we're gonna have Trump money too.
But now the fact that he is, as you have articulated numerous times, the fact that he and the Republican Party are using Christianity to essentially get their cause, does that not make it a spiritual war? And while you think of that, I want to make sure we put some scriptures. So if we go to Ephesians, I think this is chapter 6, starting at verse 10, it says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand.
So it's hard to fight an enemy that you can't see. And it's not as gratifying to fight an enemy that you can't see because you don't know when you've won the victory. You don't know when you're making advances. You have to just assume and believe by faith that you're making if you're fighting an unseen enemy, a spiritual enemy, right? So it's a lot easier to put a face to that spiritual enemy, that power, that ruler that you were talking about in that scripture. It's a lot easier if you can put a face to that or a label on it. And the thing that concerns me most is that people are very aptly identifying a group of people as the spiritual enemy. And a friend of mine posted something. He said, there's a clear line being drawn now. And you can see it. This was after Charlie Kirk's murder. There's a clear line being drawn between the light and dark and light and darkness in this world. And so he wanted to make it a political thing. He's saying, the Republicans are the light, and then the Democrats and liberals are the darkness. And so that clear line is being established. You see all these people. The Republican Party just has this mantra now to say the evil Democrats, the radical left, and they're using very derogatory and incendiary words that describe a whole group of people as evil. And you would suppose that there's no Christians who are Democrats apparently, because it's the whole party is evil. And they can do that because they equate someone's liberty to sin and our acceptance and our fight for somebody's liberty to sin with our fight for that sin itself. And I don't know how you get away from that. It's a strategy that will be effective and that will continue to be effective and drive wedges between the left and the right. And the left will always be accused of being evil. Why? Because they support people's ability to choose evil over good. not that they support evil itself.
Oh, and I think to the way you're then saying it, I feel like then it's a mixture of both. I mean, there's one thing to me when you have a culture war in which you're just saying, "Oh, immigrants are bad, so they're mass deportation," or a culture war in which you're just saying, "Oh, the liberals are bad, so let's just go into their cities and pay them for trying to convict me." I mean, to me, then when you are taking a face, then to me, you're making it culture. But when you're looking at, like I'm sure Republicans will say, will be abortion, or when you're looking at what some Republicans will say be gay marriage. I mean, those things aren't things you can physically see per se, unless you're going to watch someone do it. But to me, they're saying, hey, I'm not fighting the person. I'm not saying the person is bad. What I'm saying is this ability to do X is bad. And so then let me fight against X. And so I'm not targeting the person. And on the flip side, because to me, something I think about I think sometimes the argument, just like we're talking about the government shutdown and these medical subsidies, if we as Christians believe no, we should be able to, or we should make sure that poor people or people who are marginalized have access to healthcare so that, we are taking care of our community. And then I'm trying to fight to do that. Not saying that the Republicans are wrong for their fight, but saying, hey, I'm just trying to fight to do this. Is that not then considered a spiritual fight? Because you spiritually believe that no, God is calling me to ensure that if I have the ability to help someone who doesn't have health care, that I then exercise that ability that He's blessed me, this opportunity to bless me to do that and fight for those people.
Well, I think they've taken a
For that
spiritual
right.
problem. They've taken a spiritual problem and made it a natural and brought it into a natural war because, like I said, it's hard to fight an enemy that you can't see. So what you do is you now make the persons who support that spiritual cause or who are the face of that spiritual war, you make that person your enemy. And we see that they're doing is making enemies of those people that they should be making disciples of. And so now they've identified a whole group of people that are their enemy. And the reality is a little bit on both sides, and you sort of hinted toward it in terms of how you treat immigrants and how you treat the poor people. I told my friend, I was like, it's not a line between light and darkness. It's a line between wheat and the tare. And so what's happening is that, it's always been a line between light and darkness. We always knew what was right and wrong. Now, if anything, that line was getting blurred by a lot of people because they were saying, okay, wait a minute, you have to accept that this type of lifestyle is acceptable in the United States. But to those who follow Christ, the line has always been there. There's no question about it, unless of course you got turned over to apostasy or something like that. And there have been some pastors who have turned around and said, "Hey, there's nothing wrong with this type of lifestyle, and the Bible does support this." And so there have been those exceptions, but by and large, the line is between good and evil, light and dark, has always been clear for the Christian, for the believer. What has not been clear was the line between the church and just Christians. And I make this distinction. I said, you might be Christian, but you're not the church. Jesus didn't say He was coming back for Christians. He said He was coming back for a church that was without spot or blemish. And He actually spoke and said, delineated, there will be many people who will claim to be mine, but and will have done great exploits in my name. And He says, I'll say to them, depart from me because I don't know you. And I never knew you. And so He made a distinction between those who might be Christian, but not necessarily the church. And that parable of the wheat, he gave a parable where there was a man who went out and sowed good seed. And then somebody came back after in the night and sowed some bad seed among them. And then as they started to grow, somebody noticed and said, hey, wait a minute, there's some bad seed, some weeds growing among our wheat. And He said, should we separate them? He said, no, let them grow to full maturity and then separate the wheat from the tare or from the shaft, from the weeds. And the reason why He did that was because, if you start looking at some of the biblical analysis of it, the reason why He said wait until they come to full maturity is because it's kind of hard to tell which one was wheat and which one was the weed. And until they come to full maturity. And then you can clearly distinguish between the two of them. And he said, take the wheat and that'll be my harvest, but take the tare or take the weeds and throw it into the fire. And so the thing that has not been clear, and I guess I'll go back to what I was saying before, it's always been clear to the believer what's been light and what's dark. What has not been clear to the believer is who's Christian and who's just a church. I mean, who's the church and who's just Christians. And now we're starting to see that true line being delineated. Those persons who think that the means justify the ends are probably going to be the tare, but they profess to be Christian, but they're not the church. Those people who understand that even if it means I have to suffer, I have to stand for what I believe is right, and I can't compromise on this just because my pockets get lined by it. Those would be the people who would be considered the church. And I think that's the line that's being drawn. Is that now? So we're taking now on one side, it seems like we're taking a spiritual war and giving it a natural face, and on the other side, we're taking the natural face and identifying the spiritual war behind it. And so I think both of them are actually going on at the same time.
Well, that's what sometimes it frustrates me when people feel like they don't have to fight right now. They feel like, oh, even as Christians, hey, that's the government thing. I don't have to vote. I don't have to get involved. I don't have to do anything. And I know a lot of times when people think of spiritual warfare, they really think of more of an internal battle between their natural instincts of sin versus their ability to walk in light or be obedient to God. And that is a spiritual warfare that does happen internally. But to me, if God is exposing you to what's happening to other people, I think he's also then saying, hey, I need you to help me with this, or I need you to recognize there's a fight going on, and your complacency or your stillness is only hurting. It's not putting on that armor and going out and making sure that you are. I'm not saying you go and try to become an elected official, but it doesn't mean that you just say, oh, my hands are tied. Government's going to do what they want to do. And if, as long as me and my family is okay, then I don't need to engage at all.
So that armor, when he said put on the armor, just every piece of that armor was a defensive tool, except for one. There was only one offensive tool, and you got that scripture. And does it actually define the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, the feet shod with the gospel of the peace? All of those are
Flaming
defensive.
arrows of the evil one. Yeah. So then you got
Yeah,
your flaming arrows. But yes.
yeah. So every one of those pieces that we're supposed to put on is to protect us. Is a defensive posture so that we are not destroyed by the attacks that come after us. There was only one offensive tool that we had, and that was the sword, right? And so if we launch a battle with any tools other than the one offensive tool that we've been given, then we're fighting out of order. And I'm of that belief that our perceived complacency is not a contribution to the problem. I think as believers, it was never intended for us to fight back and to not using the ways of this world. And we have gotten distracted because of the liberties that we've been given here in this country to believe that we can use this tool of democracy. Yes, now we have another offensive weapon. No, that's not the offensive weapon that you're supposed to be using. Use it for a civic, and we've said this before, use it for your civic obligation, but don't think that you're going to fight a spiritual war using a tool of democracy. It's just not possible. And then the last thing, even as you were talking before, I was reminded of a scripture in, I think it's John, where it says, no man builds a house without first counting the cost, because it would be an embarrassment for him if he got started on it and couldn't finish building it. And you say, what does that have to do with anything? Well, the reality is that you want to enter a spiritual war using a carnal weapon that you have no possibility or chance of actually winning. The scripture is pretty clear about telling us that what the end of this thing is going to be, and the end of it is going to be an abundance and a proliferation of evil. It's going to be a proliferation of wickedness. And so we're not going to be able to stop that. And this is what I want my Republican and conservative friends to realize is that you're not going to stop the evil that's going on. You're not going to stop sin by passing some laws. Certainly not by passing laws. If you really were intent on trying to stop sin and get rid of evil, then you would use the weapon that you're supposed to be armed with. And all the rest of that stuff is just to help protect you against the fiery darts of the enemy. But instead, we want to go find other weapons because the one weapon we were given is not strong enough in our perception. Why? Because we can't identify the enemy and we can't identify the progress that we're making, and it always discourages us. But it's much more heartening when you can see a face to the enemy and see that you're making progress. And that's why so many Republicans right now are celebrating when they see a bunch of violations of the Constitution going on. They're still celebrating, bombing vehicles, boats that are coming toward this direction or even going the other direction, and then saying, hey, yeah, this is our war against drugs. No, you're violating all types of principles that you once stood for and you held dearly because you've identified an enemy and now you're seeing progress with it. When it seemed like for years you were praying in your closet. Jenison Franklin said that. He said, for years we were just praying in our closet and not seeing anything happen. And we decided that we were going to abandon those and we wanted to get a fighter so that we could see some results. And that's exactly what they got. And that's what they're celebrating.
Well, and I don't, because I do agree we are supposed to use the weapons that God has given us, and they're typically not weapons of the world. If you go through Second Corinthians chapter 10, it talks about the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strong hands. We demolish arguments and every present pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. But I don't want to get off this, I guess, this visual, because sometimes we're visual that, hey, I put on the armor and then I just sit and wait for someone to attack me. No, you're still supposed to go spread the word. You're still supposed to go be disciples. You're still supposed to go and carry your message. I'm not saying you go and have to like fight per se, but at the same time, you will be fighting because what comes at you is way more distractions, way more evil than what you're bringing. And so, and that is to say that God isn't all powerful. He is. But again, the way of the world and how we are built, we are more so going to see the evil than we will recognize and praise good. And so that's why I'm still saying, but you've got to go out there to think that you can just sit here and say, well, I got on my armor. And so until something slaps you in the face, I don't have to do anything. No, he said, okay, put it on. But you are to go out and get my people. You are to go out and spread my message. You are to go out and make disciples and followers. And in that process, you are going to have to fight. You are going to have to go against what people's natural propensity is, especially in this world, which is greed, which is lust, which is selfishness, all this other stuff that you're going to have to go up against as you try to bring people to Christ. And so that's why I'm still like, you still got to go out there. This idea that you can be complacent and sit and say, well, as long as it's me and my house, I don't have to worry about everyone else. I think that you miss the purpose of what being obedient to God's word it means.
Yeah, I think you're right. You do have to get out there and do it, but you have to make sure that your method is correct, and then you also have to make sure that your goal is certain. Before you go into a war, you need to know what your uh, goals that you hope to achieve as a result of it. Those people who think that we're going to use our weapon, even a spiritual weapon, to establish good and dominance of Christianity in this world don't read the Bible. They just don't. Either they don't read it, they don't believe it, or they don't accept what the Bible says because it never puts Christians in a position of prominence. It always tells that we're going to be exiles in the land. It always shows that we're going to be subservient to some degree to corrupt government around there. And if you think that you're going to go and actually put Christianity on top, then you're not really necessarily the church because the church was never called to dominate in this world by carnal standards. The kingdom that Jesus established was not of this world. It was of another place. And so when he had victory even though in the natural he was held captive, he still had victory in the realm of his kingdom. And we're just not satisfied having victory in just that realm because we want to see the results with our natural eyes. And as a result, I'm like, okay, well, you got your reward here on earth. That's what you're seeking right now is to get your reward here on earth. And what does it profit a man to gain this world and eventually to lose his soul? And unfortunately, that's what's happening with a lot of them. That's why I think it's so important that we have that line drawn between the wheat and the tare. And there are people out there, and I'm so glad to hear that there are people out there who are saying, no, this is not right. The problem that I have is that our voice is not loud enough. One of the things wanted to suggest to you about talking is about the salt lost its savor. You know, if the salt loses its savor, its ability to impact those things around it. That's the whole purpose of salt. When you add salt to something, it impacts anything that it comes in contact with for the better, hopefully. But when the salt loses its savor, how will the world then be salted? It won't. It won't. And what's happening right now is that the Christian message is being lost because it's being co-opted and hijacked by a group of imposters. Salt substitute is what I call
And so, no, because I also do want to be clear. I'm not saying that we're at a spiritual warfare against Republicans or even
them. Right.
against Donald Trump, because even when we look back at the New Testament, it wasn't as if Jesus was saying, "Hey, I'm in a war against the Pharisees," or "I'm at a war against Rome." I mean, he made it very clear that he was here. I'm here to save souls. I'm going to do it through the method of love and obedience that God has called me to do. And so, but that to me is what I think we are, and this isn't new. I mean, I know a lot of people are like, oh, this is now a war. And even a cultural part. We've had culture wars. We're always going to continue to have culture wars. If we study history, this isn't anything new. Now it gets elevated and heightened and more real because we're actually experiencing it versus reading about it. But that isn't new either. And as much as I attack Donald Trump and will continue to do so, I'm not saying that the spiritual war is against him personally or against the Republican Party or even against white nationalism. Now, again, those are wars that we have to face. But I'm not saying that's necessarily the spiritual war. And maybe that's then part of our conversation is to some degree, the spiritual war is, hey, our ability or inability to show the love that we should be doing that Jesus did. And I shouldn't say inability because we have the ability to do it, but we're fighting against the, I guess, propensity to not do it, to sit on ourselves, to sit on our hands, to focus on, well, if it's not happening to me, then I don't want to deal with it. Or even as you focus on your own meditation, yes, fast, meditate, but then you are to do something. That self-care is great, but it is also still to help you go out into the world and again, spread that love, get disciples. And so that, as we talk, that to me is where I'm resolving the spiritual war is the fight against our own ability or our lack of focus or intentionality in going out and showing love and being the church so that people are ready to come and receive, because we are definitely in a position that people are looking for us, but we are not showing ourselves. We're not out there spreading it. And so all they're seeing is the distractions of the culture or whatever is happening in government and the like.
So how do you then separate it from, how do you talk about the problem that's a spiritual problem without seeming to attack the natural manifestation of those problems? The people who naturally manifest that
But I don't
spiritual
even
problem.
think Jesus did. Because again, Jesus was very clear about the Pharisees. He was, even as they came and said, "Oh,
He
what
called them
about?"
hypocrites.
Yeah, that's I don't know if the point is for you to try to be so clever to separate the two so that people aren't distracted. I mean, it is one thing if someone comes and asks you about it, like they did to Jesus. Oftentimes they would ask, and he would provide an answer. But I don't think we should necessarily say one doesn't completely go against the other. But we do have to be clear of, hey, am I attacking the person or am I attacking the ideal? I mean, to me, Project 2025 isn't a person. Now, you can make the argument that is something tangible or something physical, but to me, I'm not so much concerned about the fact that there's a plan as I am concerned about the fact that a plan is being instituted, you know. And so I don't think it be fair to ignore what's going on just to say, oh, I want to make sure that the focus is on the spiritual war and not what's happening to people in real time as they even in themselves are trying to fight to eat while you're trying to send a message about Christ. I think it would be disingenuous to not acknowledge that they're in a poor condition as you send this message.
I've changed my strategy, and I want to just give a quick in these last couple minutes that we have. I just want to give a quick testimony how I got to this point. My daughter was born prematurely. She had my wife had HELP syndrome, and I almost lost my wife and my daughter. But the night that we were making the decision, we found out that she had HELP syndrome. We initially were praying God let her carry it to term because my daughter was only 30 weeks. And in the midst of all of that, the Lord said, she's coming tonight, but she's going to be healthy. She's going to be healthy at this point, and she's not going to have any problems. And so immediately I changed my strategy. I said, okay, God, well, if that's what you say is going to happen, then I'm going to change my prayer to say, God, let her come tonight. Let her be healthy. Let her have no issue. And so I find it more effective to pray according to God's will than to pray according to my will. And my strategy right now is changing from praying for prevention to praying for preparation, because I think we're in a situation where, the scripture is being fulfilled. And my concern is that many churches and church leaders are still in this prevention type mode, and it's not going to get better. And they keep telling their congregants to go out and do this X, Y, or Z to help it to get better. And they're misleading their congregations, because if you read the scripture, we know what the eventual outcome is going to be, and it doesn't look very good for Christians until Jesus come back. And what we'll find is that without adequate preparation, people will abandon the faith. They will like, I'm out of here. No, no, no. But what we must start doing at this point is preparing Christians to be to endure the persecution that lies ahead for them. And unfortunately, it looks like so many other people are saying, "Hey, we're winning. Christians are winning big time, like we've never won before." But the reality of it is that you're losing. You're losing. You're gaining this world, but you're losing your soul.
Well, first of all, I want to make sure our listeners understand that you do have your wife's permission to talk about her health condition. I'm breaking any HIPAA laws here. But yeah, we'll end on that note. Hopefully, we've gotten a lot of people commenting and let us know, how are you? Either do you feel like you're in a spiritual warfare, and if so, how are you handling it? How are you fighting it? And if you don't, tell us why you don't feel like that way. I kind of want to hear what some of our audience or listeners have to say. So until,
It's
oh,
curious whether or not there is a difference between a culture war versus a spiritual war, for that matter. Is there a
yeah.
difference? Let us know what you think about it. Does cultural wars always become a spiritual war, or do our spiritual wars eventually become cultural wars?
So until next Saturday, hopefully you can catch a repeat of this episode on K Day Live as well as V Day. Is it V Day Live?
K Day. He said
K
B
Day,
Day
I would
Live.
say K Day Live and Star Radio Live. That's what I meant. And Star Radio. You can also catch this episode on YouTube as well as right here on Facebook. And you can catch a repeat on your favorite podcast platform. Um, and hopefully you guys are subscribed and following on each of those platforms, as we greatly appreciate not only your support, but also your comments. So until next Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, thank you guys so much for tuning in.